Fire. So today is the beginning of a new month in our global vision for the entire year, which is a world that works for everyone. And today we begin a series in March of talks having to do with realizing the power of mind. And today we're going to be talking about creative imagination a little bit. Although Stephen did a good portion of my talk, I will have to say that. It never ceases to amaze me that the one mind shows up in such a significant way. I want to thank Tim for his presentation this morning. I appreciate it so much. One of my all-time favorite books is one called Creative Imagination by Neville Goddard. And just recently, if you've never experienced reading Neville Goddard, you might want to put that in your possibility for 2016. Neville Goddard was an Englishman who was a contemporary of Ernest Holmes. And I first heard him in 1968 at the Scottish Rite Temple up on California Street in San Francisco. And it was transformative. Me and 1,999 of my friends were there, and I thought at the time, if there were a church that taught what he was speaking about, I would belong to that church because I resonated so much with what he was saying. And he never actually wrote a book. Someone transcribed all of his talks and put them in various books. And recently, Tarcher Penguin in New York has come out with a volume that's about this big that has all of whatever it is that he'd ever had transcribed. Interestingly enough, I didn't find the church until 1973 when I moved to Southern California. And I began going to Weight Watchers at that time in Pasadena at the Women's Club. And the lecturer was so reminiscent of Neville in her lectures that she gave to us. Deanna never spoke of recipes or food. She always spoke about how if we just changed our thinking, we could change our lives. And ultimately, she was the one who invited me to go to Founders Church to hear Dr. Hornaday, and the rest, as they say, is history. And in class I've shared, when I went with her that particular day, my husband said, you've got to take your own car. This could be a cult. And they could capture you and keep you there. He was never a very positive person, but he was even less positive on some occasions. But anyway, I drove over to Deanna's and rode with them down to Founders. And honestly, in those days, Founders was filled to the brim. The main floor and the balcony. They had a 150-person choir in the backdrop in the very front. Dr. Hornaday was in a little crow's nest speaking booth. I don't know what they call those. I guess it's a crow's nest, almost like. But he stood up there, and I thought I'd heard the word of God. I just sat there transformed, and I cried through the whole service. The music affected me, the talk affected me, the prayers affected me, and I was transported, and I knew I had found a home. Neville said, change your conception of yourself, and you will automatically change the world in which you live. Do not try to change people. They are only messengers telling you who you are. Revalue yourself, and they will confirm the change. So, yipes. I started to think as I was reading that quote yesterday, these people who irritate me are the messengers telling me who I am. This is the silver bullet moment, revalue myself. But it's them who are irritating me. Just like Stephen pointed out, the guy sitting next to him was irritating. And I realized that I learn most from those who irritate me. Seriously. Because the contented people and the loving people and the generous people, they don't take up free rent in my head. It's the ones who irritate me who take up the free rent. So you may be thinking, I've heard that before. And you'd be right. But if we haven't embodied the idea of revaluing ourselves, then hearing it doesn't do one single thing to having a changed life experience. We are the ones who have to revalue ourselves. When we come to this teaching, every one of us is here to revalue ourselves and our relationship to God. I've revalued my relationships and discovered the ones that no longer serve me. Now, I don't mean that in an egotistical way. I mean that there are certain relationships that suck the life's blood out of me, and I learn sooner than later that these are people that I might need to release. My health is a constant revaluation of what works for me and what doesn't. My career is constantly being revalued, and for most of us, this is a really big one. Because where we used to stay in a job for 30 or 40 years, like our parents did, and maybe even some of us here did that, the young people of today are constantly changing jobs. They're moving to a different experience. And they do it with regularity, and apparently it's a good thing these days. Stability on a job is not necessarily what we used to think of stability. It just means that you're complacent in what you're doing and where you're working. I revalued my worth in terms of money. When I discovered that the amount of money I have is directly related to how I value my self-worth. You know, there's a parallel in all of this stuff. And then there's the revaluation of our relationship to God. And as far as I'm concerned, this should be at the top of all these different revaluations, because once we have done that, we not only can see everything else for its value in our lives. It's usually the one that comes last, isn't it? You know, do I call for prayer when I have an immediate problem, or do I wait until it just drives me nuts? Do I wait until it's a last resort when I call and ask for prayer? There is no future without God in the present. There's no future without God in the present. God must be put first on a daily basis in a conscious and intelligent way in order for all other facets of our lives to work. Neville said, "I will be" is a confession that I am not. The Father's will, God's will, is always I am. Until you realize that you are the Father, there is only one I am, and your infinite self is that I am. Your will is always I will be. So what does that mean? What does that really mean? Well, when we push our dreams and desires into the future by saying I will or it will, our good always remains at bay. And another part of this quote that is a little hard for some people who might be new to our teaching is the part about our being the I am, or our being God. Ernest Holmes says that we are God uniquely individualized. And he said if the ocean could be perceived as all of God, then we're a drop of water in that ocean. He says that in The Science of Mind time and time again. While we aren't all of God, we still contain all the qualities of God. So this is a big idea and a little hard to grasp at the outset. And yet it is true that we are God's means to be, and we are uniquely individualized expressions of God. Deepak Chopra said, "The best use of imagination is creativity. The worst use of imagination is anxiety." How many of us engage creatively in anxious behavior on a regular basis? Don't put your hands up, because I don't want to know. I don't want to know who you are. I do know that when we're anxious, a lot of times, that it is, it may not even relate to who we are. It may relate to the people that we have in our circle of influence. If we were immersed in this idea that we are God, then there would be no anxiety. There would be no disharmony. There would be no issues to deal with. You know, let me change that a bit. When we are immersed in the idea that we are God. When, not if, because it's a given. Life is so perfect and all around us is in harmony. we would not be able to see a discordant appearance at all. And even if we did see something that might be a little bit out of kilter, we would be able to deny its effect on us. Ernest Holmes says, don't deny that there's no illness or no poverty or no, I would just say lousy relationships. Don't deny that. But let's deny the effect that those things have on us. That's where the denial part comes in. What, if anything, did you bring into this room with you today? What anxiety, what sadness, what anger have you been carrying unnecessarily that you might like to be lifted? You know, maybe your life is completely and totally wonderful. Maybe there's nothing that needs to be adjusted. I don't say changed anymore. I don't say fixed anymore. Something might need to be adjusted. It's like a TV screen that's kind of out of kilter a little bit. We can adjust that, right? But we can't adjust anything in ourselves if we don't first know that we are totally and completely responsible for our reaction to what's going on. Those questions that I asked a minute ago remind me of a School of Ministry class where the instructor once asked in mid-session, did anyone come into class with a headache this morning as they entered the room? One hand went up. Does anyone in the room now have a headache? 2 more hands went up. Why did the 2 of you take on a headache? He asked. After some silence, it led to a very vigorous discussion, which came to the same conclusion that is advocated by this thing called access consciousness, which I'm finding very interesting. Google it, access consciousness. It is always appropriate to question an unwanted experience by asking, who does this belong to? Okay, there's another silver bullet. Am I affected by something that really belongs to somebody else? And how often does that happen for me? That would seem, I can only use myself as an example, that so often we can't creatively imagine life differently because we are taking on unwanted experiences of someone else's making. Now, you would think as good religious scientists we would be able to recognize that when it happens. But I think sometimes we blithely go through life and just think this is the way it's supposed to be. Why should we feel miserable because of someone else's experience of life? And if this does belong to someone else, how helpful is it that I fall into the ditch with them? There's something biblical about that. I know if Cal were here, he'd know what I was talking about. So Neville says, stop trying to change the world since it is only a mirror. Man's attempt to change the world by force is as fruitless as breaking a mirror in the hope of changing his face. Leave the mirror and change your face. Leave the world alone and change your conceptions of yourself. That's all we can do. That's all we can do. On Wednesday night, John led a discussion downstairs for having to do with the Season for Peace and Nonviolence. And it was so wonderful and such a good discussion. And Daniel, one of the people who was attending, had a great metaphor for this idea in the Wednesday night group. He said, he likened it to our having our own garden to tend. But instead, we look across the fence to our neighbor's garden and to see what weeds need to be pulled up there. Or we look to the Middle East's garden. Or we look to the White House's garden, when what we really need is to tend our own garden and pull our own weeds. If I look at your garden, or the White House, or the Middle East, or Africa, it means it's a means to divert attention from what needs to be handled at home in my own heart and soul. That's all it is. If I'm trying to fix or to change somebody out there, it's because, I'm unwilling to fix or change what's going on in my own life. The weeds of my garden represent those things that are unhealed in me. And until I choose to align with Spirit in a significant and conscious way, the weeds will tend to choke out the flowers and the vegetables. They take precedence over, the weeds take precedence over the good ideas and the seed thoughts that could be planted constructively instead of destructively. Every time I judge someone else, I reveal an unhealed part of myself. Lots of silver bullets for me today. If I'm giving free rent in my head to what is wrong with the world or with you or with the government or whatever, then there is no room for my imagination to see anything right in my world. Yipes. This is a long quote, but we failed to do the works of Jesus Christ, he said, because we attempt to accomplish them from our present level of consciousness. Although that's, in my estimation, that's only where we can go, our present level of consciousness. We will never transcend our present accomplishments through sacrifice and struggle. Our present level of consciousness will only be transcended as we drop the present state and rise to a higher level. We rise to a higher level of consciousness by taking our attention away from our present limitations and placing it upon that which we desire to be. Do not attempt this in daydreaming or wishful thinking, but in a positive manner. Claim yourself to be the thing desired. I am that. No sacrifice, no diet, no human tricks. All that is asked of you is to accept your desire. If you dare claim it, you will express it. It is daring to move forward with a new idea. It's very daring and sometimes can be very fearful because we, in the human experience, we want to know how this is going to show up. We want to know how we can do this. We want to know what, when, where, why, all of those things. But we have to stop thinking small. Stop imposing limitations on ourselves that keep us stuck where we are. And for God's sake, stop whining. One of my teachers years ago told me that I could no longer tell the story of my upbringing. It was boring and old. One of my best teachers, I got to tell you, and not worthy of my continued attention. He was right. He was absolutely right. It was a boring story. And more recently, my mentor, Maureen, told me the same thing in relationship to what happened at this center this past year. She told me I was acting like a victim. And she said, you are not a victim. Your center is not a victim. And yes, it's true that sometimes we do feel victimized by people and circumstances. But when we notice what's happening and we continue to engage at that level with those people or situations, it is no longer something that is happening to us without our permission. We are perpetuating it. We keep it alive by telling the story. It's alive! It's alive! We walk around with our story wrapped up in a nice little box with a big bow on the top. This is my story. Let me show you my story. We are letting the story become larger than life. And it begins to take on a life of its own. Someone else is in control when I continue to tell a story. I am not. The past cannot be our excuse for our present moment behavior. I can't say to you, I'm the way I am today because I had an unskilled mother. I don't get to say that anymore. I'm the mother now. I'm the grown-up. The past cannot be our excuse. What someone might have done to us was done by invitation. Oh, there's another silver bullet. Hear me. What someone might have done to us was done by invitation. And we fully participated in the arrangement because it was part of a sacred contract that we made long before it happened. Read any of Carolyn Mace's stuff, and you'll get this. My friend Joe LaSalle, whom some of you know, wonderful, wonderful Joe LaSalle wrote, he said, "Belief affords us the ability to achieve our dreams, while passion urges and dares us to claim it." Dare to claim your dreams. Only passionate people live their dreams. However, when we believe that we're at the mercy of someone or something else, there is no place for those dreams to go. God didn't provide the obstacles. God simply says yes to whatever it is that we desire to experience. I provided the obstacles. You know, that old joke about someone pushed my buttons. They may push my buttons, but they didn't install them. You know, I did that all by myself. We all did that all by ourselves. If I have buttons that need to be pushed, then someone is out there willing to do that for me so that I can see something in my life that might need to change. So the obstacles to creative imagination are always self-imposed. Always. I limit my own good by believing that my dreams can't or won't materialize in form. If that's where anyone here is today, find a mentor. Find somebody who will believe in you until you can believe for yourself. You know, years ago, Mary Morrissey wrote a book called Building Your Field of Dreams. And she talks in that book about her experience with Jack Boland, who was a unity minister outside of Detroit, Michigan. And Jack Boland had a huge congregation, and he was an incredibly successful unity minister, who was also, incidentally, a recovering alcoholic. And he said his life didn't begin until he got sober. So Mary said that she told Jack that she didn't know how what she'd visualized for her life was ever going to happen. There were just so many obstacles to her realizing her dream. And Jack Boland told her that he would believe in her until she could believe for herself. And he did that. Today, Mary Morrissey's a multi-million dollar coaching business, many employees, and she's in demand all over the world for her Prosperity Plus series that she does. She has changed the lives of so many people. And this is what her dream was. It wasn't to be a multimillionaire. Her dream was to help facilitate the change in the lives of people who would be willing to do that. And she has done that. And as a result, she embraces what Marcia Sinitar said, do what you love and the money will follow. She's done what she loves. And we're going to use those DVDs for our summer prosperity class because there's so much juicy information in them to love and support any dream that we might have. The subconscious mind is malleable. It can be molded, and new information can be then embraced to take the place of the old, no longer useful information. We have to be willing to reprogram our thinking so that our limited conceptions become unlimited conceptions, and they are embodied fully and completely. This is really creative imagination at its highest best, and this is using the power of mind in an incredibly constructive way. Be willing to have someone in your life call you on your BS, your belief system, and allow them, you could use the other words too, and allow them to steer you in the right direction, knowing with God all things are possible. Will you please join me in consciousness? And so today, as I speak this truth in the first person for all here present, I know that God in its infinite wisdom has created an opportunity for each one of us to be fully orbed, to be fully enlightened, to be fully aware of the power and presence of God by means of each one of us. As always, that God so loved itself that it needed form to express. It expresses as everyone here today. We may embrace a different body, but there is still only one thing congruent about each and every one of us, and that is that one mind, that one power, that one presence that is within each one of us. And that one mind can move out into our lives in such miraculous and beautiful ways that as I become aware of my own version of creative imagination, whatever it is that I deem as a possibility for me becomes a probability, and it becomes a realization in my life. That as I move out of my own judgment about myself, my own condemnations about myself, and I begin to see that those no longer serve me and no longer work for me, I can then begin to build a new relationship with myself, a new relationship with everyone in my circle of influence, because I take personal responsibility. I take responsibility for whatever it is that is going on in my life. And through that is the beginning of independence and self-reliance. I no longer feel victimized by anyone or anything. I know that I am totally and completely responsible for my own life. And so today, I creatively imagine the life I've dreamed of. I no longer have the privilege of making denigrating comments about myself. I no longer have the privilege of negativity, because I am the brand new 2016 model. And that model knows only perfection, it knows only creativity, it knows only good, it knows only love. And so today, I accept this for everyone here present as we joyfully say together, and so it is.